Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hello, Arnie.
No
Good to
worries.
see you again.
Pleased to have you, Robert. Always pleased to see you. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi, Arnie. It's nice to be back. You're working as hard these days.
We
I
certainly are.
think
Yep.
it's a little more pleasant out west here than it is for Bob. Bob is sweltering, I think, but it's not bad here right now.
What do you call
Been
sweltering? What do you call sweltering,
a
Bob? What is it?
Well, sweltering is 39 degrees with the humidex. It was actually about 35 real temperature today, but very humid, so it's oppressive,
Okay.
and
I had a
just not used to that.
I had a smirk on my face because I thought it was going to be something pretend hot temperature when I see 47s in the desert. But
No,
35 is still up there. So, okay, all right. Point acknowledged. It is warm. And if it feels like 39, then that's even warmer. So, yes, it can be like that. All right. I'm pleased to have you. I think it's this forum, because we cover some sometimes not so easy subjects and we go in them deep. And today is no different. So I'm going to cut across to social credit views. This is from the Clifford Hugh Douglas website, socred.org, and it's in regard to the proposed ABC Act to full-fledged Douglas social credit. Now there are references here, and I'll actually just open that there so you know. This is actually the document, House of Representatives in United States, and so the ABC Act, there it is, and Mr. Haydorn is discussing it in regard to social credit in its very infancy, in a period of like conception, that it can actually um, have a humble beginning and work from there. So that to me is an interesting point. I've read it a couple of times, and I can see that it's something that needs to be discussed. And so I'd like Robert Klinck to give me your thoughts, please, Robert.
well, I find it interesting that it's being proposed at this time because we have just gone through the coronavirus crisis, where millions of people have lost their jobs, and they're being given support money unconditionally, really, just payments to get them through this difficult period, apparently. But I wonder if this bill isn't intended to extend that concept, and where people have been left is in a position of such great economic disadvantage that I wouldn't want the idea to get around that we should just go on giving people some stipend to keep them alive. Uh, so I find the timing a little bit suspect, and I don't know the people who have proposed the legislation. I haven't looked into that. If they're all Democrats,
Hmm.
and that makes me wonder too a little bit, because they have their ideological position, and in some respects, I find it uh, dangerous.
Hmm.
I certainly think it's a good thing that they are positing the idea that people can receive money without having to moil and toil for it in employment. But they are making it an arbitrary thing, which I think is an error, because as social creditors, we believe that there is a mathematical problem in the distribution of income, and that the reforms should be aimed at correcting the mathematical uh, lack of synchronization in the economy. And therefore, we would have not an arbitrary sum affixed to this, but we would have something that would be determined on the basis of actual production and consumption statistics.
Yeah.
So their concept is quite different from ours, but the fact that they are introducing this idea that people can receive something, they're not justifying it on the grounds social creditors were. And I think that's a big mistake, because social creditors say that the justification is inheritance. And these people, as far as I know, don't talk about that at all.
Yeah.
So that's somewhat interesting, but I'm suspicious of it. Also, it's coming from politicians, and I don't have much confidence in anything that comes from politicians these days.
Yeah. No, that's vitally important. I think that it's actually coming from the state, and it possibly could be an issue of new credit, and that the state becomes the parents, if you like, the parents and grandparents being benevolent towards the individuals, the recipients of this payment, and that is not social credit. That is not at all social credit. What it is it's a nanny state. It's essentially would still reinforce totalitarianism. No change, but it's just that they would issue you with some sort of crumbs in order to keep you alive. And that is a completely different thing. So I think it's interesting that we talk about this because it crystallizes our thinking. The idea of a dividend or a stipend, excuse me, a stipend, um, is from the state is one thing, but a dividend as a consequence of the advanced control, robotics, automation, the inheritance placed essentially over and above the state. It comes as a free gift from actual civilization, from God. Your thoughts, Wally Klinck?
Well, there's no quid pro quo or whatever they say. It remains a state policy. It is not an inheritance as such. And I don't know, but my understanding is that the chickens will come home to roost, and these costs will be eventually costed to society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a bit of a lure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, if you're destitute or on the verge of it, you're not going to feel like refusing some help. But the Democrat position particularly is they're oriented toward welfare. We are oriented toward inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
Welfare is granted on certain conditions. Inheritance is without condition.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I think it's a bit of a dangerous thing to get all caught up in this thing, because I think it's, the Fabian approach, the Fabian socialist approach is gradualist.
Mm.
And this is a way of temporarily lifting people out of a crisis, but it doesn't attack or deal with the problem, the basic fundamental problem of the price system being non-self-liquidating, incapable of liquidating its costs,
Yeah.
because it doesn't distribute enough income. And there's a big difference in concept and ultimately probably in operation as well. For instance, we are finding that prices are already starting to be pushed up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because people say they've got to somehow make up for these losses they've had. And that means that the Fabian policy of continuous, gradual inflation is not dealt with.
Yeah.
That is something that actually disempowers the consumer.
That's certainly an interesting take on it, Wallace, and that's right. You can understand the people who are selling products as trying to crawl back some of their losses, but of course that will have inflationary effects because the purchasing power of the individual won't cover what it used to. So it's an erosion, and quite frustrating because it has this to me. It's almost as if there's an attempt to say, look, we tried it, and it's going to be discredited instead of actually being quite clear that this is not social credit. Similar to, if you like, social credit parties, the histories of social credit parties, where they never actually get to implement social credit at all. It's always some bastardized concept.
Exactly.
And then, of course, it's we'll use that as an opportunity to discredit, which, of course, they're not. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck?
The idea they put forth too about this, I don't know if it's a gigantic, is it platinum coin? Anyway, they seem to think that they have to produce a coin that has $1 trillion of inherent value. I'm not sure of their idea there, but that's the way I'm interpreting it. And this seems to me to be analogous to the old notion of the gold standard. And there are many people, particularly in conservative circles these days, who believe that the only real money is gold.
Mm-hmm.
But this has got to be the oddest concept, because they're saying that before you can develop your economy, before you can build a bridge or lay down a road, you have to dig some yellow metal out of the ground. And nothing could be more superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this idea of the coin that they want to use as a backing or justification for the creation of the money that they want to distribute to the population. I guess they must have made some sort of a calculation of the correspondence between the value of this coin and how much money they have to distribute in order to cover everybody in the population of the country. But it seems to me like an odd form of superstition in exactly the way the gold standard was. Yeah, I just don't follow their thinking on that. And in fact, social creditors would say that money is issued on the basis of the real wealth of the community. It's not issued on the basis of some coin that they've fabricated.
Yeah.
But when the production of the community comes into existence, it has to be financed. And people complain about the huge debts we have, but these debts are not entirely unrelated to the real wealth of the community. The way the financial system is operated is a racket, and it doesn't do a proper job of representing this. But the debt that is in society, to a great extent, does represent the real wealth of the community. It's just that it's an accountancy, and the accountancy is being badly done, so that instead of being sort of a license to do what we think is beneficial for the community, it's a trap to snare us into a coil of indebtedness that grows and grows endlessly, and ultimately going to be very destructive to the economy.
Yeah.
They're not talking. Yeah, go ahead.
I've always seen the level of debt as essentially how much the current financial system is actually confiscating from the community into their own coffers. The level of indebtedness, and the fact that indebtedness has a ceiling on it, because you just can't go into any further debt, and that's where we are. And it seems that then, of course, that you stunt the economy. You don't produce what you're capable of producing because you just can't afford to buy it. Whereas if you turn the machines on, turn them up, and increased your production, of course, then you would buy it. But the financial system confiscates that. So it is an interesting anomaly. The Democrat proposal, this ABC Act, yes, you look hard at it, and you soon starts to, as you disassemble it and look at the entrails in detail, you recognise that it's state empowering itself to create new credit to issue to the community to feed them crumbs, and so it holds the state in its existing narrative. If you like, the political parties in their existing narrative that we will give you sufficiency, we will feed you only crumbs, but we'll feed you. Whereas it doesn't actually review the whole structure, the correct relationship with the individual, that the dividend is based on the cultural inheritance. It's based on the actual productive capacity, the real technology. And that to me is a completely different narrative, that there should be an abundance for all. If ever there was a time in history where we could all have our own home, we could all have our own car, we could all maintain our highways and our byways and our power generation and water supplies and our sewerage systems. If there was ever a time in history where all these things are so within our grasp, but the financial system won't allow us to do it. It won't allow us to do it because it won't issue the numbers. And that's a totally different narrative. And that's why The concept of social credit is about recognizing a time of abundance, a time of inheritance, if you like, a time of jubilee. Your thoughts, Wally Klinck?
Well, yes, that's true. I think that we are in danger of being deceived by people who really have an alleged or feigned belief in ultimate scarcity, because they tend to be of the mind that we are going to run out of this and run out of that, or resources, and that we have to restrict or contain our lifestyle to restrict that. They're trying, I think, to give us what do they say? A mess of pottage for the expression. What is it?
Yeah, it's actually exchanging a mess of. Go on, Robert.
A message
A mess of
pottage.
pottage. That's
That's
Your
right.
right.
inheritance,
Yeah,
exactly. Your inheritance.
yeah,
And
That
I
was
think,
what Cain did. Adam, no, Cain or Abel. Abel, one of those two did
It was
in the
one. It
Bible.
was one of those earliest in the Old Testament. That's right. Who gave it up for a mess of
Oh,
pottage? Gave
that's
up
right.
their
that's
inheritance.
right.
Yeah, yeah. Keep
That's
going,
right.
Wally. Yeah.
I think we have to be very careful not to be deceived. And we are, of course, being deceived. And as someone was noting, it seems surprising that so many people in business, especially big business, seem to be going along with this situation that has arrived, where there is all sorts of demonstration against industry, which could further release us from toil and debt. And where you would think, thinking about business as business in a normal sense, you think that they would be quite in opposition to this latest, but it's centralization of power.
Hmm.
And the present system works towards centralization of power because everybody's struggling to deal with a volume of debt that is simply not possible to deal with. So they think that there is a scarcity because in their mind, there is a financial scarcity. And for some reason or another, the human being seems easily distracted or deceived into translating that into a concept of physical scarcity.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, very good point. I want to actually cut across to a website, our website here. I'm just going to clear the deck so I can go to it. And in our website, I've got some audio files here, some podcast files. Planned surrender of Australia, and why is this important to our current discussion? Or land rights, which of course is a communist influence within Victoria, rebuilding the Great South Land, and retelling the story. Jeremy Lee, this is actually where I wanted to touch on. This is a springboard. Jeremy Lee, retell the story. It's a springboard to the podcast library, because in that library, what you'll see is that Jeremy's got some excellent um, other podcasts, and one of them, of course, is How Can the Whole World Be in Debt? How can the whole world be in debt? And this was a video, but we've got it on audio here. We've managed to be able to save it. Very important listening, this particular listening, because it's actually placing our thinking in an area of material abundance, automation, advanced control, robotics, the knowledge that's there, but it's not released to the community. There's no actual claim of that inheritance, and that to me is what it's all about. That yes, this bowl of pottage instead of our inheritance, and that's what they're showing us again and again. History is fascinating in that it repeats itself. It repeats itself. It's cyclic. I was reading just the other day. I was touching on uh, year of Jubilee for debt forgiveness. But the thing is that what it was is it's this idea of a confiscatory financial system is as old as Methuselah. It goes back 5,000 years. David Graeber's book, 5,000 years of debt history, and it's not just there. That's recorded history. He shows that debt has always been there, and it's not just someone loaning something, but it's actually loaning it on condition, a usurious condition that actually is confiscatory, and they will never get out of it. Now we look at modern work practice of debt. And you think about John Perkins and Economic Hitman, and it's no different. The Economic Hitman presenting these narratives to business leaders or political leaders that will bring about a time of plenty. But it's always the same trick. They overextend, they get in too much debt, and then of course they can't redeem the debt. They can't actually get out of debt. And so this same story has been going on for 5,000 years. Douglas social credit answers that narrative, and it answers it clearly. And the thing is, it is a time of plenty. It's a time of God's abundance, because that's what robotics, advanced control automation is all about. It's about taking the yoke off our own back, putting it on the machines. What we've got to do is look at a system that's actually going to equitably distribute that right of inheritance. It is so, so important. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck?
Well, the payment of this money from the state, even though they say it would be unconditional, is a little bit frightening to me, because I know that there is a drive on to develop a comprehensive system of surveillance over everything we do in life. And the plan is to implement this through the internet, through the possession that practically everybody has of a smartphone now. And the idea is that you will no longer make purchases with cash, not even with a credit card, but you will just use your phone. And I know that this is a possibility because, for a fact, I know it's been done in China. In China, this is old hat, in fact, the use of your phone to make payments. If you're driving down the road and you go through a toll station, you don't stop. A photo is taken of a card up in the corner of your car, and that money, the toll money, is automatically deducted from your bank account. This is how sophisticated it is, but it's worse than that. Because now, if you go into a store and you make a purchase, you leave, and it does a facial recognition of you, and it automatically deducts the value of what you purchased from your bank account. Well, this is all in development. It's being proven in China, and there is no doubt that it's going to be imported to Western societies. It's being discussed already. So what we're going to have is a disappearance of any kind of privacy. And I think back, to the Victorian period, and the absolute right of privacy that was insisted upon for individuals. And we're going to have no privacy. All our transactions are going to be accounted for. They'll all be registered in these phones. Everything else, what kind of taste you have in food, and it's a phenomenal thing. This is all going to be accessible by the state. So when you have a system of payment like this from the state, I think it fits into this scheme, and it could become an element in this assault on the right to privacy. And frankly, I think the Democratic Party has had a very strong strain of Puritanism in it. So they might be saying that right now these payments will be made unconditionally, but once they decide that there are perhaps people who are not worthy of them, which is a possibility, then they could arrange through this surveillance system by the smartphones and other technology. People who who don't have smartphones apparently are going to be issued some fob that hangs around their neck, and this will contain all that information. So there's going to be no escaping it. And I just think that when the state is given the power to issue stipends like this, then it probably, before too long, will also have the power to say, you're not meeting certain standards that we expect of you, and therefore we might reduce your stipend.
Yeah.
This, it's always a stepping stone. It's we're being taken step by step into a new future, and it's a future of absolute control over the individual.
Yeah.
And I fear that this could be fitted quite easily into that scheme.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I agree. It is heading towards a dystopian future. And the thing is that asking the question on this forum, and we continually do ask this question, it's in regard to the individual. Should the individual have sovereignty over their own life, and the state is there as to support that sovereignty? The state is there to protect that sovereignty, to provide an environment that is conducive to that sovereignty. Or is the state all powerful? And I believe it was answered 2,000 years ago. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but unto God the things that are God's. And the first commandment is to God. It's not to the state. The first commandment. And the second commandment is to your neighbor. And I might add that your neighbor, if your neighbor is suffering, if your neighbor is not free, if your neighbor is destitute, then you're actually not doing your duty because you've got to render to him the same as you would have him render to you. So we really are our neighbour's keeper, and I think that's most important. Um, I'm going to call for closing comments because I can see that it's late in certain parts of Canada. And closing comments and summary, please, Wally Klinck.
Well, I'm probably showing more signs of being tired than Bob is, and he's got more excuse than I. But yes, I think that, what is a human being? We are not just simply mechanisms. We are conscious beings with a soul, we believe, and a unique and special characteristic about our awareness, our personality. There's a great convenience to some of these things, but I think we should have the maximum amount of choice as to what we exercise in utilizing them. I personally like to go shopping myself sometimes because it gives me much more personal opportunity to inspect the produce and make a choice, a distinct, discriminating choice. I shouldn't use the word discriminating. It's a terrible word, isn't it? But but it's the basis of intelligent action. And that's something that certain power-seeking people want to erase from human consciousness. They don't want people thinking in those terms. I mean, discrimination is, in fact, without exaggeration, the whole basis of intelligent action. And without that, the nature and purpose of life seems to be almost eliminated. So I really think that our freedom to choose. One fellow being interviewed here in Canada just a few days ago, he was quite annoyed, and he was telling me some of the people who were just, outlining the requisite procedure to do something. He said something in fact, leave me alone. I'll make my own decision. Thank you. Don't bother me. Douglas said, if people get testy or display unpleasant characteristics, maybe you should stop annoying them.
I agree.
I mean, it's something to do with the fundamental nature and basic nature of mankind, that they want to be free. They were created without any conditions being consciously imposed upon them. And I think that that's the natural way of humans to be and to exist. They want to be free. And that's the difference between the social credit approach and the welfare approach. The welfare approach, you are accepting terms set by someone else, where inheritance, you're a free person to do what you want with your inheritance.
Yeah, beautifully put, Wallace Klinck. Beautifully put. That it is the difference between choosing the right to choose or refuse one thing at a time is actually to me it's a demonstration, a daily demonstration, minute by minute demonstration of your freedom of choice. And if the state can impose if you like, a stipend directed towards you and feed you crumbs, and then of course the state can also place conditions on those, whether you carry your ID with you, whether you get vaccinated, where you can live, and all those sorts of things, where perhaps even whether you're allowed to produce or not. This is just a form of total tyranny. And
Or travel.
or travel, that's right. And I might add that Western technology is actually the responsible for what's being experimented in China. Google is a big part of this thing, and they're the ones who are actually developing it. And I have a view that I call it capitalist communism. Capitalist communism and Marxist communism are both communism. That's what they are. They meet together in this form of complete and total and absolute control. And we're seeing capitalist communism exercise itself in, if you like, the free world, where you can no longer have the choices that you wanted before. And I think that's most profound, that you actually start thinking in these terms. Capitalist communism and Marxist communism are both communism. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert.
Well, I think that we can look at things like this ABC Act and we can use them as springboards to uh, explain our own concepts, and we can also perhaps recognize some merits that are in the ideation of these things, but we should definitely not get distracted in placing our hopes in them, get distracted from our genuine social credit convictions, because social credit was systematically developed in a way to be realistic. And these people are abstractionists. They're just coming up with arbitrary numbers and they're going to do such and such. But social credit tied everything to real phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
And that was its, really its, I would say, unique characteristic in economic thinking and other thinking as well. So I don't think we should be led down false paths or follow red herrings. And therefore, while we might say that some principle has been enunciated in this legislation that is worthy of consideration, I think we have to keep struggling to get the genuine message of social credit out.
Yeah.
And that is that if costs are accumulating in the production system, then there should be the means of liquidating them at the point of consumption, and there shouldn't be an overhang of debt going on and on into the future that will limit our potential to develop. So,
Yeah.
very important that we stay true to our fundamental concepts.
That's right. And social credit does eliminate debt in the sense of the material abundance is available, and there is sufficient spending power in the hands, collectively, in the hands of the community to purchase it in the form of the national dividend and the compensated price. And so these are profound. It's actually based on the real world. It's not an abstraction. As production improves, as production increases, then the dividend by its very nature would increase as well. And as production winds back, if we go to a stage of producing such high quality products that we don't need to buy one every year or every 5 years, but they last a lifetime, then of course that means that production can actually be reduced, and so can the dividend. It's unnecessary to make that item again because it's quality from the start. This actually responds to the environmental question. And it also, what it does is it takes our focus away from materialism, that we always want. What's wrong with what you've got? You know, I talked about this set of pajamas that I had, and my brother was still wearing them. That was incredible. I think it was like 25, 30 years he got out of a pair of pajamas. You may not like the thought of that, but the fact is clothing can be made to last, and it can still be of reasonable sort of nature, and I guess you say a discerning person would buy quality. They would discriminate, and by quality given a choice. And quality is, or discernment or discrimination, are important words when you consider all of these things that are in front of us, and you've got to actually revisit this method of thinking. And that's why if you like a world that says you can't discriminate, what does you discriminate every single day on every single thing? You don't eat pies because you like pasties. Well, how dare you insult pies? How dare you? You know, you're a certain type of racist against food. I mean, come on, what's going on? This is the stupidity, but this is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive
Yes.
dissonance being the tool that stops you from thinking. It causes a jarring in your thought process that I've got to discriminate. Oh, but you can't, because if you discriminate, you are this. We have to reconstruct our thinking, and not based on an abstraction, not based on a theory, but based on the observable phenomena, the natural world. There was a time when the church insisted that there was such a thing as natural law, and it was based on that, and it's no different in the real world. This, to me, social credit, Douglas social credit, is as straightforward as natural law. It's observable, and then it's adjusted to suit phenomena and our understanding of technology. It really is an age of reconsideration, because we're at that point. We're at that point in civilization or collapse where we're either going to choose to be free, or we're going to be slaves to the state. And of course, the state is now a tool of the money power. That's all the state is. It's a tool of the money power, and I think we need to reconsider: is freedom worth pursuing? And if it is, well, we better get off our backsides and do something. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for today's forum. It's always good to chat and to consider this deeper thinking. I'll look forward to our next forum.
Nice talking, Arnie. I look forward to the next time.
Thanks, Robert.